Good evening. It is September 1st, and welcome back to Cape Media News, your source for hyperlocal news that matters. I'm Lauren Williamson. The Massachusetts Department of Public Health has announced the detection of the West Nile virus in a mosquito sample collected from Barnstable. This marks the first detection of the virus in the area for this year. Although no birds or humans have tested positive for WNV so far. The virus is primarily transmitted to humans through mosquito bites and poses a higher risk for severe infection in people over the age of 50. The MDPH recommends several precautions to avoid mosquito bites, including wearing long-sleeve clothing, using insect repellents, and mosquito-proofing homes by draining standing water and installing tight-fitting screens on windows and doors. Local authorities are working closely with MDPH and Cape Cod Mosquito Control for ongoing surveillance and control efforts. The town of Harwich recently terminated its tax collector, Betty Clark McClay, at the end of her 6-month probationary period. Select Board Chair Mary Anderson cited the termination as a personnel issue, but declined to comment further, and the search for a new treasurer and tax collector is already in progress. Town Administrator Joseph Powers had initially described Clark McClay as highly qualified for the position, but he was unavailable for comment on her departure. This latest termination adds to an ongoing concern with the town about frequent departures and retirements of department heads, with Select Board member Donald Howell calling for a full discussion on why people are leaving their positions. In response to an influx of migrants and a growing housing crisis, the Massachusetts state government had plans to use the Yarmouth Resort in West Yarmouth as an emergency shelter for up to 100 migrant and displaced families. The state has designated 120 emergency shelter units across Cape Cod, including other towns, to meet the increasing demand. However, the Yarmouth plan was put on hold after it was discovered that the building did not possess a certification of occupancy, according to State Rep. Chris Flanagan. The emergency shelters are part of the state's efforts to deal with more than 20,000 people, including families and pregnant women in need of housing. The state says it spends $45 million per month on its emergency shelter program, which also received a $1.9 million federal grant. A Facebook group titled Citizens Concerned About the Yarmouth Resort was started on Sunday, and by Wednesday had over 1,300 members. The group has organized a protest at the Yarmouth Resort at 10 a.m. Saturday morning. TravelMag.com recently put out a survey for the most expensive beach vacation destination in the world for August 2023. The survey had certain criteria in order for designations to qualify. First, at least one beach, a minimum of 20 hotels and inns, with at least 10 rooms available per establishment, 3-star rating, and centrally located to the town and beach. Airbnbs or other vacation rentals were not included. From everything that was qualified, TravelMag.com then calculated the average price for the cheapest night's stay in a double room. Nantucket takes the crown in the top spot as the most expensive beach vacation in the world, averaging $694 per night, more than a $200 increase from Positano, Italy, which is number 2 on the list. The United States is home to 11 of the top 20 destinations, with the other 9 all in Europe. New England is represented by 5 destinations: Nantucket, Kennebunkport, Provincetown, Bar Harbor, and Portland. U.S. Representative Bill Keating announced last Wednesday that the Federal Transit Administration, or FTA, has granted the Woods Hole, Martha's Vineyard, and Nantucket Steamship Authority route commuter status. This allows the service to tap into an annual federal funding pool of over $5 million. This move comes after collaborative efforts between Representative Keating, the Cape Cod Commission, and ferry service ridership data. The new commuter service classification provides the authority with a consistent source of federal funding, which will alleviate financial pressures and potentially lower fares for riders. Steamship Authority Communications Director Sean Driscoll said, quote, As a self-funded agency, every dollar we spend is generated from our ridership. So anything we can do to offset the burden on the ridership, the lower we can keep our fares. The state legislature created the Steamship Authority in 1960 to provide adequate transportation for persons and necessities of life of the islands of Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard. Around 2.9 million passengers used the ferry service in 2022 alone, according to the latest annual report. The Yarmouth Housing Authority has proposed building up to 49 housing units on around 19 acres of land off Forest Road in West Yarmouth. And in 1989, the land was given to the Housing Authority by the town for the purpose of affordable housing. In 2022, the Housing Authority voted to dispose of the land to an affordable housing developer to design, permit, fund, and build and manage the property. The development project has been in consideration for approximately 40 years, and a due diligence assessment was completed in 2022 by Bowler Engineering of Boston. There's a history of previous attempts to develop the land for housing with various proposals and authorizations over the years, some of which were rescinded or deemed not legally binding. Local residents have expressed resistance to the housing project during a forum. They fear that the development can lead to deforestation, worsen flooding issues, and negatively impact the water table. The project's engineers and planners have highlighted that the soil on the proposed site is conducive to managing stormwater runoff. They suggest that the stormwater requirements will be carefully considered during the design process. As tensions remain between the need for affordable housing and the environmental and flooding concern raised by local residents, the project's planners and engineers are aiming to address these concerns as they move forward with the development plans. The proposed timeline includes finalizing due diligence in the fall, releasing requests for proposals in 2024, reviewing proposals in May 2024, and aiming to begin construction in fall 2025. In various towns across Cape Cod, the list of top earners is not limited to administrators or managers. Instead, in many cases, police officers, fire lieutenants, and patrol officers find themselves at the top of these lists. This is particularly evident in towns like Barnstable and Yarmouth, where overtime and detail pay can often more than double the salaries of these public servants. However, these augmented incomes come at a steep cost, both to the individual and the communities they serve. Long hours, high stress, and the inevitable strain on personnel and family lives are negative ramifications that accompany excessive overtime. Adam Riker, the union president for Yarmouth Fire Department, raised concerns about the safety implications of such work schedules. He was quoted saying, "At some point, is this getting unsafe? Are they working too hard?" End quote. The culture of overtime is not only a function of willingness to work, but it is often a necessity. Departments must maintain a certain level of staffing around the clock, leading to instances of forced overtime when employees are unavailable. In Barnstable alone, 32 of the top 50 earners are police officers, who collectively earned over $1 million in overtime in the fiscal year 2023. This brings up the questions of sustainability and fiscal responsibility. As towns on Cape continue to grapple with these challenges, it becomes increasingly crucial to find a balanced solution, one that ensures both the safety and the well-being of public servants and the financial sustainability of the communities they serve. Coming up after the break, a protest at Healy's fundraiser. Stay tuned.
No idea how to get things done.
We're afraid because our lives are going to end.
My lives too. We're all the same age.
And no, we're not. I'm 20. How are you?
I have kids that are 9.
Fossil fuels, and fossil fuels.
Touch you.
Okay.
You have absolutely no idea how to get things done.
I don't mind if you die.
So don't tell us how to think.
Don't get out!
Welcome back to Cape Media News. I'm Lauren Williamson. Climate Defiance, a climate activist group, disrupted Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey's fundraising event on Nantucket this past weekend. Protesters demanded that Healy would ban new fossil fuel projects. Climate Defiance has a history of interrupting and shutting down events like this to draw attention to their cause. Healy is pursuing an aggressive climate agenda in her first term as governor. On her first day in office, Healy quoted saying, "The climate crisis is Massachusetts' greatest challenge, but there is an enormous opportunity in our response," end quote. As she appointed the state's first ever, quote, climate chief and established the Office of Climate Innovation and Resilience. Attendees of the event reacted towards the protesters with frustration and criticism.
I never had a governor who visited Martha's Vineyard, but often it is overlooked.
Excuse me, Governor Healy, I'm sorry to interrupt. We're in the midst of a climate emergency.
What's your name?
My name is Matt.
Nice to meet you,
I'm
Matt.
20 years old and you're throwing my future. The state of Massachusetts is building 10 new fossil fuel infrastructure projects right now. We need you to ban new fossil fuel infrastructure right now. Will you commit to doing that, yes or no?
Let's talk about that, okay?
Let's talk about it, yes or no?
Let's talk about that. There's a huge transition that we're undergoing, and there's a lot of work to do. But let me tell you, and I
First step of the
appreciate...
transition is to ban new fossil fuels. Will you ban new fossil fuel infrastructure?
I think it's enough.
Matt. Guys, I appreciate it's democracy.
End fossil fuels, Mara. End fossil fuels. End fossil fuels, Mara. End fossil fuels.
You've assaulted us.
How did I assault you?
There is no future.
End fossil fuels, Mara. End fossil fuels.
Longer than
Fossil fuels. End fossil fuels.
touch you.
End fossil fuels. Fossil fuels.
You hurt your cause.
No new fossil fuels. We've spoken to her before. She's ignored us.
No new fossil fuels.
You have no idea how to get those.
We're afraid because our lives are going to end. And
We're all the same age.
and no, we're not. I'm 20. How
Well,
old are
fine,
you?
I have kids that are 9.
Okay.
You have absolutely no idea how to get things done.
Can you tell me what are you doing to help
No
them?
new fossil fuels.
are you doing to
I have
help them?
solar everything. I have solar in my
Is your
house.
individual act going to help us? No, the act of someone in power is
If you
going
had half
to.
a brain, you would understand
We
how
have
to get
no
things
money.
done.
We have no power. Maura has power, and she can help save us.
But
she's
your
not.
rudeness prevents you
We're
from
gonna
talking
die.
to her.
Who cares how rude we are?
I don't mind
and
if
the
you
people
die.
in
I'm
I'm
Nile
gonna die a lot
love
quicker
us.
than you are. So don't tell us how to think.
Logan Langley, director of the Division of the Watershed Management, took the lead in orchestrating a significant public hearing centered on the rejection of a surface water discharge permit application associated with the Pilgrim nuclear power station. The hearing attracted participants both in physical attendance and through virtual channels. The Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection interim decision to deny the permit modification request was hailed as a victory for Cape Cod's environment businesses and the community. Concerns about the proposed discharge of radioactive and chemically contaminated wastewater into Cape Cod Bay were passionately voiced during the hearing. Holtec, the applicant, was accused of violating various laws and regulations, including the Ocean Sanctuary Act, Endangered Species Act, and state laws on public health and anti-degradation regulations. The potential impacts of such discharge on marine ecosystems, public health, and the economy were hot topics of discussion. Opposition to the proposed discharge came from various quarters, with organizations like the State League advocating for a ban on the discharge of contaminated nuclear wastewater. They emphasized the potential harm to endangered species and the environment, urging decision makers to prioritize the well-being of future generations.
Holtec's proposed discharge of approximately 1.1 million gallons of radioactively and chemically contaminated wastewater into Cape Cod Bay is plainly illegal.
There is no other choice but to deny the permit under the state law.
Holtec's application admits that even after treatment, the wastewater will include both radionuclides and chemical pollutants.
That is precisely what is prohibited by the Ocean Sanctuaries Act.
Why is it that we are debating what is something that is illegal? It's a mystery.
The stakeholders and communities do not consent to a discharge.
Not one drop.
To actively put radioactive, poisonous chemicals, radioactive materials into water that is very important to millions of people. It makes no sense. Only if you can make a lot of money doing it, as Holtec is trying to do.
You know, Holtec has a history of ignoring state authority and violating laws to their advantage.
This must stop. And it is the responsibility of all of us to see to it that it does.
Haven't we as humans done enough? My future depends on what you guys do.
Good God, this got to stop. And I think Massachusetts should show Holtec that they're not above the law.
However, some stakeholders defended nuclear energy, highlighting its importance in providing reliable and low-emission electricity. They argued that the contaminants proposed for discharge were within permissible levels and stressed the role of nuclear energy in meeting energy demands.
My name is Brian Campbell, retired electrical engineer, and I strongly support discharging the treated water from Pilgrim Nuclear Station into Cape Cod Bay. Generation Atomic calculates the water outside the plant, if one were to hypothetically consume it, they would need to drink approximately 80 gallons to equal the radiation dose of eating a single banana. The presentations to Holtec, to NDCAP, shows Holtec to be a good corporate citizen performing the Pilgrim decommissioning in a truthful and open manner that should be commended. Instead, Senator Markey expects Holtec to fund NGO $263 million a year Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute study for treated water discharge. Unfair. Holtec is right to refuse Markey's funding demands. Markey is funding the study with taxpayer-funded $75,000 grant from NOAA, Sea Grant. I question the bias of this study, as $263 million a year, WHOI shifts its conclusions on studies depending on funding sources. On the endangered right whale, Woods Hole Marine Ecological, Mark Baumganter said in an interview, "We already have a fairly industrialized ocean with shipping traffic and fishing activities. Adding these large wind farms with many, many, many turbines is certainly concerning." Woods Hole said they received a $500,000 donation directly from Ørsted and supports offshore wind. In a May 2022 memo, Sean Haynes, NOAA Chief of Protected Species, penned his concerns about how offshore wind construction and surveying could disrupt the endangered Atlantic right whale. The development of offshore wind poses risks to these species, which is magnified in southern New England waters due to the species' abundance and distribution. SaveTheRightWhales.org's Thrown to the Wind documentary will bring attention to the correlation between expansion of offshore wind energy and the rise in whales' deaths along the East Coast. Where is Mass DEP on the real dangers to the endangered right whales? Or are they to be sacrificed on the altar of green profits? PROFITS.
Order, please.
Mass DEP will continue to review the concerns raised during the hearing as they make their final determination on the permit application. Coming up after the break, an interview with Councillor Cusack. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Cape Media News. I'm Lauren Williamson. Last week, we spoke about the community activist group Save Greater Dalles Beach and the concerns some have about Avangrid's plans to land an offshore wind cable. Residents were also disappointed that their elected councillor, Paul Cusack, was not in attendance for the Osterville Village Association's annual meeting, where the group gave an update on their efforts to stop Avangrid. Cape Media News met up with Councillor Cusack at Dalles Beach this weekend. Take a look.
I think it would be great if the town of Barnstable can partner with an offshore wind partner in the future to potentially help us deal with our most existential crisis, which is really the nutrient loading of our bays and ponds and lakes and estuaries. And so by far the biggest opportunity is potentially the town getting financial benefits from a partnership with an offshore wind operator to help us pay for the financing of all the sewering that is necessary due to some lawsuits here on the Cape that has required us to create the CWMP, our Comprehensive Wastewater Management Plan. And it is a 20-plus year, $1.5 billion project for the town of Barnstable to sewer an enormous amount of the portion of the most heavily dense portions of the town of Barnstable, pretty much Route 28 out to Mashpee. That's where the density of folks are. And we have for a very long time have effectively, because of our Title V septic systems, have effectively been flushing our toilets into our lakes and bays and ponds. And that has to stop, and it's going to be expensive, and we need to come up with innovative, different ways to look at financing, and one potential way to do that is with an offshore wind partnership. No, it's the opposite. The taxes will go up, and they'll go up faster if we choose not to pursue a potential relationship like this. And it's pretty clear that we have serious financing challenges ahead in our sewer program. And to meet that challenge, we are going to have to bring a bunch of new growth dollars online. And an offshore wind partner could be the ones to bring that online. Otherwise, we're going to have to do a Proposition 2.5 override and get actually raising taxes more than 2.5% in a year. And 50% of our town is on a fixed income. If we're going to end up raising taxes, it's going to hit people hard. And I do feel the opposition to this project is effectively arguing for either higher taxes sooner, more expensive later sewering, or the possibility of the town having to reduce services. And that's not good enough for me. That's not good enough for Osterville. That's not good enough for Barnstable. Possibly, yeah. I know the governor was down here talking about solar a lot just recently, within the last 6 or 7 weeks, I believe. But we got to be honest about what the opportunity is that we have out here. Some folks call the area of the Atlantic just below Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard the Saudi Arabia of wind. And if we have that, and that is close to our shores, and we have available substation queue position right here in Barnstable for that wind energy to plug in here, we have got to look at that as a benefit and not as a curse or something that we have to work around. And so, yeah, I do feel like renewables in a whole bunch of ways, I mean, we are decarbonizing our economy in this state and in the nation as a whole in an aggressive manner, hopefully. Right now, the overall wind power industry is suffering from some buffeting winds, no pun intended. But, you know, Ørsted, for instance, just came out with a bunch of negative news, and we definitely know that Avangrid is going to be canceling those power purchasing agreements and having to pay a $48 million fine. So the writing is on the wall that there is stress within the wind industry. So I'm aware of that, and we have to be looking further afield. So in this type of space, I would not necessarily be suggesting that solar would be the thing that we'd be looking for as an alternative. But if we can't partner with an offshore wind company, then I think our best bet is to amp up the rate at which we adopt innovative alternative septic systems. I've attended so many meetings on this topic, and I definitely have taken a hit recently for not being able to make it to the last Osterville Village Association meeting. I take that as a missed opportunity to hear from my constituents and their ideas and their concerns, and no offense was intended. I had to prioritize a personal engagement over that, and I made that choice, and I stand by it, and I would do that again. But I take my job very seriously, and I take this opportunity very seriously. I'm looking to take on more responsibility within our town and within our village. I put at the very center of that are my constituents' concerns. And so I'm balancing what is a very loud opposition to a potential partnership here with a bunch of folks in this village who are entirely excited about the clean jobs that would be coming with this, the faster rate of cleaning up our water, and the overall potential to pull out an enormous amount of carbon by having these 1,200 megawatts come from wind energy. I would say that, I have put out a 3,000-word essay. It's a little bit on the long side. I'm parsing that down and making it smaller, but there is a real upside for the town environmentally, economically, and we can't lose this opportunity. The opposition, I don't at all sort of question their intention, but I do question their judgment about this, the potential upsides. I'm not naive necessarily about the potential downsides, but I think they can be managed. And I don't see the economic challenge and the environmental challenge as two mutually exclusive events. I feel like there's a big opportunity embedded in this challenge of dealing with eutrophication, the nutrient loading of our lakes, bays, and water, and as well as the decarbonizing effort that we've got going on as we try to switch to renewable energy off of fossil fuels. The search for a potential other landing spot is not over, and so folks should know that. This is one company who is bidding on a project, their plan to potentially come and land at this beach. But there's no guarantee that that one company is going to win this bid next June of next year. We won't know until next summer. And so there could be other ideas, other landing potentials. Also, Avangrid themselves has admitted that their search for other potential landing spots is still ongoing. Some get mentioned, New Bedford, for instance, Sandwich, but there is a plenty of reasons either baked into the law, which is environmental justice reasons, why you can't just put energy infrastructure into any old neighborhood anymore. And then there's certain aspects of what goes on with the peaker plant at the Sandwich location that is a non-starter. We have open queue space in our substation in Barnstable for this energy to plug in. That company or any company is going to want to stretch a power cord across our town to plug in there, and we should pay that. We should request a fee effectively, and get rest advantages out of that, so we can leave this place better off for ourselves and for the next generation of folks who want to enjoy Osterville and Barnstable.
Thank you for joining us this evening. If you have a story you'd like to see covered, send us an email at newstip@capemedia.org. Tune in next week for more hyperlocal news that matters on Channel 26, Apple TV, Roku, and Fire TV. To stay up to date with us, check out our social media pages on Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. For Cape Media News, I'm Lauren Williamson.